right, now that I've got the majority of my rows here, I've got my 5 rows, I am going to finish this off. So I am, as you can see, as you got further along, it's tighter and it's easier to see the groups. I know when it's kind of flimsy at first, it's kind of hard to tell what they are, but I'm just going to finish this off. I just have a couple of more loops to make here, and then we'll add show you how to add our button closure. And if you have to tie off your thread, which I can't imagine that you wouldn't have to at some point, leave your working thread hanging out, weave your other thread back through a couple of beads to that point, that way you know where you were. Tie a couple of half hitch knots in, and then just leave that tail and keep working. And then you can go back and burn it or snip it off later. And get through here. When you get a lot of thread, it gets hung up on everything, so you just gotta get a comfortable length. Okay, yeah, totally had a brain fart. Ah, I did something wrong. I couldn't figure out what I was doing. I had to reposition my thread. Alright, right through there. Even after doing all these rows, I still can't, I miss things. Then come back up. There we go. That's better. And if you find that your thread's getting a little knotted up, just run it through the conditioner again. That's what's supposed to keep it from getting knots. Sometimes it gets twisted. You have to coax it through. Be careful not to split your thread. Back through. You're just completing these little circles. Go back up. And come up through there. Alright, we're nearing the end, and we're almost to the point where we can add our button. I think you should add the button first and then figure out the button loop. That way you know exactly the distance that you have. Make sure it fits right. Hello. See again. Sometimes your thread also gets a twist in it from doing this, and you can just kind of straighten it out. There you go. And one more. Okay. Now we're to the end. All right, now we're at the end, and we can show you how to, we'll add the button and then the button loop. All right, now that we've ended the row and we are now done with this bracelet, so for the clasp, we're going to, I want to go ahead and run this needle and thread back through just to kind of reinforce it, because see how everything gets a little loose. So I'm just going to run back through here. And then we're going to add, I think I failed to mention at the beginning that we're going to use an 11/0 seed bead for the button loop. So I'm just using a matching color. You can use contrast color, whatever you like. I'm going to be using the black here. And I'm just going to run this through a couple of beads, rounds here, until I come out the other end. And this is just going to give it a little bit more strength. Oh, I can get my needle in there. Sometimes that needle doesn't want to go through both beads at the same time. And I should condition my thread some more. All right. All right, now. Here we go. See, I'm getting knotted up here. All right. You just don't want to, you just want to follow a thread path that you've already been through so you don't see it. And just till I get to the other side here. Be careful and watch this. There we go. Then we're going to fill in the very edge here with an 11/0 and the little grooves. So I'm going to come out this 11, come out this black here. All right. Now I'm going to go through this end bead here and pick up an 11/0 and run through the next end. And it's just filling in these gaps. Pick up one more. And get my thread and around that. You can use a sew-on button, but the shank buttons are a little easier to place. All right. I must have a knot in my thread. There we go. And one more. Now I do have a knot. Most knots you can just pull out. Most of the time. And sometimes you have to get mad and cut it. Which is what I'm going to do right here. So I'm going to fix this little mistake and then we'll add our knot. Our button. Alright, after I had my knot, I cut it out. I have enough thread left over that I can run it back through and make a knot. So now we are ready to add our button. And what I like to do with the button is kind of put it on there just kind of see, I want the button to be close to the edge and center it. So what we're going to do now is I've threaded my needle with some extra thread. And we're just going to follow path of the thread back through here, just a couple of beads, and then we're going to half hitch knot this thread to secure it. So I'm using a brand new thread since I had a shorter thread there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my needle and pick up a stitch, run it up under, make a loop, run my needle through it. You want to grab a hold of that little tail there and knot. Now I'm just going to run it back through till I can get it centered where I want it to add my button. And come back down to about the middle and check the position. Then we're going to pick up 6, 7 of the 11 seed beads. Sometimes they will fit through the shank and sometimes they won't. And a good way to check is just to go ahead and string some on here and then string your button on. If it doesn't go through the shank, then you just will half it. So then I'm going to thread this on. In this case, they do go through. Just work some of them through there. And then we're going to just take our needle and run it back through so we can get it worked into the beadwork here. Again, you want to follow your bead path, your thread path, so you don't see it. I'm just going to pull this. And then we're going to run it back through some beads, and then you're going to run it back up through the 11 O's that you put on there. So you want to bring it back to where you started, and just make a couple of passes through this loop. This is to secure our button. And get that out, back it out a little bit. There we go. Make sure you can get it all tangled up in your knot. Tail there. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work my way back to where my 11 O's are started and make another pass or two. Here we go. So you can see here where my 11 O's are. And we're just going to run our needle up through those, back through this shank of the button, and get through. Be careful that this doesn't catch on your beadwork here. Just if you do, make sure you get it pulled out so everything goes where it's supposed to go. There we go. I would probably do this at least 2 or 3 times, and then we'll tie off this thread, and then we'll work the loop on the other end. Just make sure you get it run through all the beads here. And if you have to do them one at a time, that's fine if you can't get it. Now I've got my button secured. I ran it through 2 or 3 times. I knotted. I'm going to leave all my little threads hanging out here, and at the end we'll clean all those up. We can use the thread burner and get those cleaned up. So now we're ready to come over to the other end of the bracelet. And you have enough tail probably to go ahead and add the beads in between, but I'm going to go ahead and thread on a new thread, and that way I can use the same one for my loop and for these little inside beads. So I'm just going to run this through a couple of times, again following the thread paths, and tie it off. So here's my tail. Again, we're going to have hitch knot this just by slipping the needle under a thread there and making a loop. Run your needle through the loop and pull. I'm going to run this back through and grab that, pull it back up through. And back through this black And then we'll be in the right position to come back out to the white. All right. Now I'm back here at the white. I'm going to slide it. This is at the very top row or end row. I'm going to pick up an 11-0 and we're going to fill in those spaces, so as we did on the other end. This also kind of tightens everything up in here and kind of keeps it all from getting too loose. And see, my thread is twisted, so you want to make sure that drops in there. Just pull it around. Alright, just need to pull it again. I want it to drop in there. There we go. Still twisted there. There. Now see how it slots in? It was twisted, so you just want to make sure you get them right. And that was just because the thread was twisted around. Alright, and here we are. Now we are ready to make a loop for our button. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to put several on here first. No real count. You just want to kind of check make sure that it goes over the button, but it's not too loose. So we're just going to string some on. Drop it down, and we're going to add some more. So I can tell that's not going to quite be enough, so we're just going to add a few more. What I like to do is go ahead and run it through one of the ends. Not completely run it all the way back through, but just one of the ends, and just so I can test it and see if it's going to work. Okay, we're going to run it through here. I'm just going to run it through these two beads here. Going to bring it over. Make sure that my button will slip on there, and it will. In fact, that may even be a little long, so if you wanted to adjust that, you could. You could just take some of those off, but I'm going to leave it as it is. And then I'm going to run this back through the same line that we started in. Just run it back through the little black 11-0s that we did along the top. And again, we're just going to reinforce this loop. We're going to run it back up through the 11-0s that we made the loop a couple of times. Just get it, make sure it's nice and tight. Make sure you don't skip any. And then back through the top row again. I did exit a couple of the beads in the loop here that we started with. So now I'm just going to take my thread and make a loop. I'm going to half hitch knot right there in between the work. Just make sure you get it in the right place where the thread was exiting the bead. Pull it, and then go back up through a couple more. Do another knot or two, and then we'll clean these threads up. And run it through one more or so here. Make another knot right here. going to run it up a couple more so we can bury that knot in the bead. I don't see it. If I can get my needle in there. There we go. Alright. Then we're going to take the thread zapper. I'm going to push the button until it gets that tip hot. And it is very hot, so you do not want to touch it. And see how it just burns that. You can even turn that down. And as I said, we're going to clean up our other little threads. Careful not to touch anything you don't want it to cut. And on the other end, all these other little tails that we had. You can do this as you go, or like I like to do it at the end where I can just clean them all up at the same time. It's nice because it gets really down in there too. Tight spaces. You know, be sure and always cap that after you're done. And then we've completed our bracelet. And then the loop slips over the button. And there you go. You have your beaded Berrry Bubble Bracelet.